Hello there. Welcome into a Monday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the Extra Sports 1300 app to do your listening. And that app, which is free to download and free to use, is sponsored by Diversus Health, Mental Health, and Well-Being for All. A veritable cornucopia of mostly Broncos topics over the course of the program. Of course, we have Monday Night Football coming up at 5, Commanders and Chiefs. But that's still plenty of time for us to accomplish what we would like to accomplish. The number to call or text into the show, 719-247-1313. Let's start with this. I don't know if you were thinking this yesterday watching that Broncos game, but Sean Payton, his theme all last week was make Wednesday like Sunday. So the thought I was left with after watching the Broncos beat the Dallas Cowboys 44-24 was just how good was Wednesday's practice? Here's Bo Nix.
Yeah, Coach, liked our week of practice. We all thought the urgency was up and, got to go stack weeks and, have a similar vibe this week and make sure that we're practicing hard Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday so that we can come out here and, do that performance over and over. And, it's tough when you get, later in the season, bodies get more sore, get banged up. It's tough to stay mentally sharp and mentally tough enough to do it over and over. But, we got good leadership, and that's what we got to do again.
Well, we'll see if they can do it week after week after week. But let's just talk about yesterday's game. That was an absolute beatdown of the Cowboys. A 20-point margin of victory with the Broncos putting up 44 points doesn't even go far enough to tell the story of that game and how lopsided it was. And look, if Cortland Sutton makes the catch in the end zone late in that game, I mean, you're looking at 4 touchdowns the Broncos went by. That game wasn't even close, and it wasn't even close early. And my biggest takeaway from Sunday is that the Broncos showed, and I'll call it a competitive maturity. And here's what I mean by that. Sunday was very much like the Cincinnati game, right? The Broncos, you could very early tell they were going to be able to do whatever they wanted. Okay? What happened in the Cincinnati game? They got up by what in their mind was enough. And in the second half, especially the offensive side of the football, I thought they took their foot off the gas. And Sean Payton showed concern about it. I showed concern about it going into the Philly game. And then what happened? Yeah, it turned out okay, but for 3 quarters, the Broncos couldn't do anything. They had an opportunity to keep their foot on the gas against Dallas and continue to build competitive habits, dare I say championship habits. The great teams, they keep their foot on the gas. They don't let up. And that's what the Broncos did yesterday. And I think that right there shows an area of growth for this team, even as opposed to, 3-4 weeks ago. This team is learning what it takes to be an elite team in this league. And part of that is you don't let up for any reason at any point. Now, you don't have to run up the score. You don't have to be calling flea flickers with 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter just to run up the score and embarrass somebody. That's not what yesterday was about. Sean Payton has great respect for the Dallas Cowboys organization. This was not petty Sean Payton. This was the Broncos just continuing to do what they do best and what Dallas could not stop from quarter one to quarter four. Now, I don't think you expect this week in and week out. I don't even want to say that this is their ceiling, right? Because you understand what was on the other side of them when especially when we're talking about the Broncos offense versus the Cowboys defense, right? We'll talk about Broncos defense versus Cowboys offense later. But just overall, yeah, they're probably not a team that's going to routinely put up 44 points. Not every team is as bad defensively to begin with, and throw on top of that how injured the Dallas Cowboys were. The Broncos, you can't expect that every single week. But what it did do was put all of this Broncos quarters 1 through 3 versus the Broncos in quarter 4 stuff on the back burner for at least a week. Here's Sean Payton.
Dallas was last in the league in defense, and plus they had a lot of injuries. Did you go into this game thinking?
We wanted to keep them last. You know, that we went into the game. We recognize the injuries. There's a lot of injuries, you know, on our team throughout the league. That was unimportant to us. We just went in the game focusing really on what we do well. And, yeah, there were a handful of plays that Troy's touchdown was matchup driven, boundary corner. I think he was teammates with Bo and Troy at Oregon at one point. That's part of the game.
And the Broncos shouldn't apologize for the state of disrepair the Cowboys defense is in. That's not their problem. But again, going to Sean Payton's point, they focused on what they do best. This wasn't the Broncos going out of their way to embarrass the Dallas Cowboys or to do things that they could only pull off in that game and aren't going to be able to pull off for the rest of the season, because that's not constructive. That doesn't help them. What did the Broncos do for that football game? They just ran the ball. The Cowboys couldn't stop it. 179 yards rushing on the ground, and Bo Nix actually detracted from that number. He had -1 yard rushing. And as far as Bo Nix running the football, because we talked a lot about this last week, in a game like that, you don't have to run Bo Nix. Okay, the reasons for running Bo Nix are twofold. One, as an extension of your running game, if you need to get a different dynamic into the running game, if, let's say, RJ Harvey, for instance, isn't quite working. Or, you know, you don't want to do the end arounds with Marvin Mims. If you just want to add something to your running attack, you can with Bo Nix. And then in terms of helping Bo Nix, if he's having trouble in that football game, any particular football game, then you say, all right, let's let him use his legs to try and get in a rhythm. Broncos didn't need to do that. Yeah, you had the interception on the first drive, but from drives 2 on, Bo Nix was terrific. So it wasn't necessary. So now you could take into account the risk of running your quarterback and say, yeah, not today. We don't need to do that today. And they didn't need to. But in terms of the Denver Broncos, and this was kind of wrapped up in the conversation last week about the Broncos quarters 1 through 3 as opposed to quarter 4. It's the idea that the Broncos need to run the ball is not just a Bo Nix thing. It is who they are. It is their identity. So you look at a week ago against the Giants, the Broncos weren't even running the ball effectively or perhaps running the ball enough against the Giants. And I'm sure Sean Payton would chalk it up to having a respect for the 4-man defensive line that the Giants have, for me, I say there's something to be said for trying to impose your will on the game. And I don't know that the Broncos did enough of that in the first 3 quarters against the Giants, but it's the bigger idea of the Broncos just running the football. Whether it's Dobbins, Harvey, Mims, or Nix, just run the football. It's who you are, and it opens everything else up. And to the point of the Broncos not doing anything out of character, did you see a big difference in the throws that Bo Nix was asked to make? Maybe one more in-pocket pass. That's what I think is most heartening if you're a Broncos fan about yesterday. It was the idea that if the Broncos play to their identity, they can still be prolific. There's this, thought that if you are a run-first team, that you can't be dynamic. And that's just not true. There's a thought that you can't put up points. That's not true. And what stuck out to me yesterday was that the Denver Broncos stuck to their identity and really stuck to what Sean Payton has asked Bo Nix to do throughout the season. He didn't coach him that much different, and that's what I've been saying. Sean Payton has figured out who Bo Nix is as a passer, and he's coaching him accordingly. All this idea of letting Bo Nix, unleashing him and letting him, like, he still had problems on the deep ball. He still had problems in the pocket. It's just not who he is. So what did you see? A lot of Bo Nix on the move, a lot of easy passes, and yet the Broncos put up 44 points. It's not mutually exclusive. You can put up points while running the football. You can put up points by having a quarterback completing easy passes. And then, once in a while, Sean Payton would dial something up for Bo Nix. But what's the best thing about yesterday is that it wasn't out of character for the Broncos. The ideas, the play calling, the identity, this is just who the Broncos have tried to be. And slowly but surely they're finding it. I just think yesterday was an exaggerated example of what could be with this Broncos team if they're right for 4 quarters. Right? They're not going to average 44 points a game. But they can be effective playing offense the way that they do. And you throw in a bad defense that is incredibly banged up, and you throw in those throwback unis because the Broncos cannot let themselves lose in those unis. They just kept it up. They stuck with the game plan, stuck to who they are, and they were rewarded with 44 points. And if we're being honest here, as impressive as that performance was for the Broncos offense, I don't think that was the most impressive thing about what the Broncos did on Sunday. Talk about the other side of the football coming up. In the meantime, your thoughts at 719-247-1313. One of the big conversations coming out of yesterday was a breakout game from a couple of offensive rookies. Why I say, as good as that day was yesterday, I think there's a bigger picture at play here, and maybe this isn't a sign of necessarily big things to come from RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant. That's next here on Extra Sports 1300. Air Force Hockey back at Cadet Ice Arena this weekend, hosting the Brown Bears. That's not their mascot. The school, Brown, Ivy League school. They're the Bears. You get it. Doesn't matter who they're playing. Just a place you want to be, Cadet Ice Arena. How about Friday night? Puck drop is at 7. If you would like to go, I have a pair of tickets for you if you simply are the 13th texter to text Falcons and your name to 719-247. 1313. Now, you could certainly make the case that yesterday was the Broncos doing what they are supposed to do. Like, that's how these normal Mondays work. If I'm critical of the Denver Broncos, it's that I never give them enough credit. If I'm complimentary, it's, take into account who they're playing. I understand who they're playing. But just them doing what they're supposed to do for 4 quarters has not been something that we have talked about with this Broncos team maybe the entirety of the season. Is this the first game that from beginning to end, the Broncos did what they were supposed to do? The defense was arguably the best in the NFL, as they continue to be. The Broncos ran the football, continued running the football. They didn't ask Bo Nix to do too much. And they did it quarters 1 through quarter 4. That competitive maturity, understanding that your job is not done just because you're up by X number of points. That's what I think crept into the Denver Broncos' heads in that Monday night against Cincinnati. We're up. There's no chance Cincinnati's coming back. Let's just, take it easy the rest of the way. And sure, they were right. The Bengals with Jake Browning were not going to come back in that game. But it wasn't about Cincinnati at that point. When you get up by a certain amount of scores, it's not about the game that you're playing anymore. It's about looking forward, whether it be the next game or I think right now we got to frame this with the Denver Broncos for what it is. This is about a collision course with Kansas City in 3 weeks. That's what this is. That game has divisional implications. It's a rivalry game. That's what it looks like with these two teams. Yeah, the Chiefs have kind of this side quest next week with the Buffalo Bills, which is a high-profile game. That's a rivalry, all that kind of stuff. But the Chiefs, because of the way this season has played out, like, their primary concern is not Buffalo anymore. It's in-house, and you give credit to Denver and LA for that because they've made it that way. So, yes, high-profile game, Mahomes, Allen, that whole bit. We're setting up for a collision course between Denver and Kansas City. And the Broncos learned the hard way last year. If they take a playoff, if they're not on their game for every single snap of that football game, they will lose, right? It was the last snap of the game that they lost that game on. So when they're up by it, and a few times the Cowboys, you kind of sat up a little bit and went, okay, is this a thing? Or are we going to, but then very quickly you're like, nope. No, it's not. Dallas isn't. They're not even going to make this thing interesting. There's a moment, and then it goes away. Then there's another moment a couple of drives later, and then it goes away. When and that's also because the Broncos kept their foot on the gas, right? Dallas couldn't come back in that game because of the way that Denver was playing. But it's also about moving forward, right? And being a team, it's not momentum. Be a different game plan, a different, scouting report and everything with Houston. It's not about momentum. It's just about the habits. The habit of playing 4 full quarters, something that we really had not seen the Denver Broncos do at any point this season. And therein lies the progress that was made. So I think you don't get so caught up in the final score. Don't get so caught up in who they were playing. Look at it. The Broncos are trying to run their own race, right? Compare that performance to the performances the Broncos have had leading up to that game. It was different. It was a full 4-quarter effort of good football. There's been some games where it's been 4 quarters, but it hasn't been good football. That was 4 quarters of good football from the Denver Broncos. And that's something you had not seen with regularity, even when the Broncos have had other opponents like Dallas that you look on paper and say, yeah, they should win this game, and it shouldn't be that difficult for them to win. Still didn't do that. Again, case in point, the Cincinnati game. So I think that's what you have to be most heartened by if you're a Broncos fan. Now, big conversation coming out of that game was RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant. And it was certainly with the way the Broncos were able to move the football, it was a good day to take somewhat of a chance on 2 rookies and see what they got. And I think what Sean Payton did was trust them to put the ball into the end zone. Right? A lot of the plays that were ran for Pat Bryant or ran for RJ Harvey, there was a chance that the Broncos would have scored on those plays. And Sean Payton entrusting them to say, I got this play that I think it's going to hit. Let's see if we can't draw up this play for Harvey or for Pat Bryant. So I'm not trying to detract from those 2 guys. But keep in mind here, RJ Harvey had 6 touches, 8. RJ Harvey had 8 touches the entirety of the football game. It's not a lot. Pat Bryant had 2. But because they were touchdowns, or in Pat Bryant's case, but with RJ Harvey, because these guys scored touchdowns, it looked like this huge breakout game. And in some ways it is, but I think there's another step that you don't need to take and say all of a sudden Pat Bryant wide receiver 2. Because Troy Franklin got his looks too. Right? J.K. Dobbins ran all over the Dallas Cowboys. So it was a significant day in the development of these 2 players. No doubt about that. But all right, now it's time to unleash RJ Harvey. Like, no, they got running back 1. Oh, it's time for Pat Bryant to emerge and become a target for Bo Nix. No, he's got Sutton and Franklin above Pat Bryant. It was a good day to kind of stress test those rookies a little bit. And to their credit, they came through. But you look at the distribution, the snap count, the carries, the receptions. I don't believe that there is this much bigger role coming for either one of these 2 guys anytime soon. I just don't. Certainly for Pat Bryant, especially for Pat Bryant. Are there a few more carries in a game moving forward for RJ Harvey because of what he was able to do on Sunday? Maybe. But J.K. Dobbins is still the guy. J.K. Dobbins has got a shot to lead the NFL in rushing if Jonathan Taylor would just knock it off. That dude is absolutely on fire right now. That was what I was watching while I was watching the Broncos game. I was watching the little box in the top left-hand corner when it flashes who scored in another game, and inevitably every time I looked up there, it was J. Taylor. 26-yard run, 54-yard run, 35-yard reception touchdown. That guy's been ridiculous. Offensive player of the year, I think at this point you'd have to say. But J.K. Dobbins has got a shot to lead the NFL in rushing or make a run at it. Now, Sean Payton's not going to deviate too much from his plan in order to get J.K. Dobbins there either. Right? Because we know the way that Sean Payton likes to handle his running backs. But because he's been so dang productive, even with the number of snaps that Sean Payton is willing to give him, he could make a run for this thing. But games like that yesterday for RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant, they help plant a seed in the head of Sean Payton that you can trust us. Right? Doesn't mean that you can trust RJ Harvey to be the number one running back or Pat Bryant to be the number one wide receiver, but just, hey, you got to play that you kind of like. You got a matchup that you like. We'll come through for you. That's what yesterday was in terms of the significance for RJ Harvey or Pat Bryant, but they are both in their spot on the depth chart and will remain there. Because Troy Franklin had a great game. Cortland Sutton, I wouldn't say it was his best. And that ball that Bo Nix, I thought it was, you could argue the best throw Bo Nix made all day was the throw to Cortland Sutton, and it bounced off of the numbers. And Bo Nix reacted as such. I mean, he dropped back, he set his feet, no happy feet, delivered the ball right where it needed to be, and Sutton dropped it. But Cortland Sutton's spot on this team is not in question. I think Troy Franklin is clearly wide receiver 2. And let's also not forget that Evan Ingram was a little bit more visible than he had been. And you have Marvin Mims. Right? Who adds a different dynamic. And he's not, and that's another thing too. Marvin Mims is not, he's outside of this wide receiver 1, 2, 3 discussion. I've said it. Marvin Mims is Percy Harvin. He has his role. There are going to be games where he pops up and you're going to think, and that was last week against the Giants, you're going to think, oh my gosh, this guy's bona fide wide receiver 2. He's not. He's not, but he's incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. But Sean Payton is going to use him. I mean, why aren't we talking about Marvin Mims being the Joker? Right? I guess it's not his receiving skills, right? The definition of Joker is this guy who has uncommon receiver skills. And Marvin Mims doesn't have that, but he's got this trait, which is he's incredibly elusive and very fast. And Sean Payton can use him to exploit a particular matchup that he likes. So if we expand the Joker term, I think Marvin Mims has kind of been that guy. but Mims has a role. So I think the roles on this team at this point are very clearly defined, at least the top guys. Sean Payton talked about it being not a matter of what they need to do better, but maybe who the people are that they're calling upon. That's just maybe a little bit more Adam Troutman to block. But like J.K. Dobbins is running back 1, Sutton wide receiver 1, Troy Franklin wide receiver 2. These aren't the guys who have their spots in question or their playing time in question. But it's a really good day for RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant. Don't want to take too much away from it. Just saying, like, look at the touches and realize that they did what they did within the role that Sean Payton has had for them pretty much the entirety of the season. Shows growth, plants the seed in Sean Payton's head that maybe I can trust these guys. But right now, to, turn a phrase from Dennis Green, they are who Sean Payton thinks they are. And he's using them accordingly. 719-24-7. 13-13. Take your thoughts. Broncos beat the Cowboys 44-24. More Drive Time Sports after this. Congratulations to Jason and more importantly, his son, as they will be going to Friday night's Air Force hockey game against Brown. I can't think of a better way to spend Halloween. And if you did not win, do not fret, because I have another chance for you to win tickets coming up in a little bit. And don't forget, this being Air Force Army Week, you'll have a chance to win tickets to that game coming up on this show as well. Speaking of hockey, it has been a frustrating week for the Colorado Avalanche, has it not? So this team was rolling. And then over the past week, they lost in overtime to Utah, a shootout to Carolina. They lost in regulation to Boston. Let me emphasize that. They lost in regulation to Boston. The Bruins. The Avalanche lost to the Bruins. Although, to be fair, this streak of not losing in regulation, it was going to come to an end. And if sometimes producer DJ Michaels was here, he would vouch for me, because I told him, as we were hypothesizing when this run of not losing in regulation would end, I said it wouldn't shock me if they lost to Boston. I said that, I swear. Did I believe it with every fiber of my being? No. But it was more of a watch. You know, they can't be beaten in 60 minutes and then they're going to lose in regulation to like Boston, right? That's kind of the tone that I took. It wasn't like mark it down, they're going to lose to Boston. But they lose to Boston in regulation, so no more Avalanche undefeated in regulation. And then they lose yesterday to New Jersey 4-3 in overtime. And I think there's a couple of reasons why the Avalanche have hit. If this is the roughest stretch they're going to have, where they play 3 games on the road, 2 back-to-back, and their one home game is against one of the best teams in the NHL, and they take points out of 3 of the 4 of them, it's going to be a pretty good year for the Colorado Avalanche, right? But the 2 reasons why the Avs had such a tough week. One, they keep falling down early. And they did it yesterday against New Jersey. Fell down 2-0. Now, they were able to come back because New Jersey, to me, and I talked about this a lot with Utah and Carolina, the style that those 2 teams play is difficult for the Avs. The way New Jersey plays is not a difficult matchup for Colorado. Their talent makes it a difficult matchup, right? And Jack Hughes is absolutely on fire right now, and he scores the game winner in overtime. But the way that New Jersey plays, the Avs can easily come back against them, because the Devils, in many ways, are like the Avalanche a few years ago. Not a ton of grit and sandpaper, very much exploiting time and space, showcasing their skills. And it's something that Sheldon Keefe is going to have to get out of this Devils team if they're going to go deep in the postseason, just like Jared Bednar had to coax it out of the Avalanche when they were making a Stanley Cup run. So I think it can happen for New Jersey. But when I watch them, they remind me a lot of the Avalanche. So the Avs being down 2-0 with the talent that they have, you don't sweat it too much. But the other side of that coin is you can't keep rallying in all of these games. You can't be the one that's always counterpunching. Because what New Jersey could do, and Boston and Carolina, they take the counterpunch, but then they can deliver another one. Right? It's so important. And there are two sports that I think starting off with a lead are the most important in. One is soccer. Maybe no sport is more important to get the first goal than in soccer. But I think hockey, it's incredibly important to score first. And if you could score, maybe in soccer, it's one goal just because of how relatively low scoring a lot of their games are. And with hockey, maybe it's getting up 2-0. But the team that scores first in hockey and gets a couple on the board, they're in a great spot. With basketball, it's like, who knows? The Nuggets started down 10-0 to the Warriors in the season opener. And by the end of the game, you completely forgot about the fact they started down 10-0. Right? Baseball, I feel like, is another one of those, like, it's all well and good to get out to an early lead, but there's so many things that can happen. Hockey, it's very important. And the Avs have started down routinely over the last week. And other than Boston, all of these teams that they're playing are quality. Utah, Carolina, New Jersey. But with some level of respect for the Bruins, that was a desperate team. And that old saying of the worst thing you can do is give a team that's down on their luck a little bit of confidence. And the Avs did. Right? And a team like that becomes more and more dangerous the longer you let them hang around. But the Avalanche have got to stop playing from behind. As talented as they are, it's just not going to work when you're playing, in the last week, the two best teams in the East. It's just not going to cut it. And that's what they have done all last week, was fall behind early. And here's kind of the bigger picture, and it ties in to the Avalanche falling down early in games. They need Mackenzie Blackwood back. The cracks are starting to show a little bit with Wedgwood and especially going to Trent Miner. And look, the guy played well enough. That second goal he gave up was absolute trash. The second goal he gave up yesterday, that's a save an NHL goalie has to make. Right? And you're looking at it down 1-0 against New Jersey for all the reasons I just said earlier. Okay, not a huge deal. Being down 2-0, now it becomes a little bit more difficult. Now, Wedgwood made some phenomenal saves against Boston. The Avs that's the one game that I think you look at with Utah and with Carolina and really with New Jersey as well. You could say the Avs just didn't put out a full 60-minute effort. Right? And even when they were winning, Jared Bednar kept talking about, I didn't love the first period. I didn't love the second period. With Boston, the skaters in front of Wedgwood just play like garbage. Right? And Wedgwood, to his credit, made some phenomenal saves. But you're also you're seeing some of the cracks form. You're seeing if Wedgwood has to be leaned on a little bit more as we go along, is he able to stand up to all that? And Jared Bednar was talking about why, because I couldn't for the life of me, I don't know about you, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why Trent Miner would start against Jersey and not against Boston. But Jared Bednar talked about after the game, he was chasing a result. He wanted Wedgwood to win so then he could put in Trent Miner. It started with the Carolina game. I really wanted to get that win, and then the plan would be, let's go to Trent Miner against Boston, come back with Wedgwood against New Jersey. Well, because they lost to Carolina, and Wedgwood was chased from that game, went back to Wedgwood so he wouldn't be sitting and stewing about getting pulled. And then they lost that game, and he had no other choice. It's like, I got to go with Trent Miner. So his whole goalie plan completely fell apart as the week went on. But they need Mackenzie Blackwood back. What Wedgwood has been able to do is absolute yeoman's work. You give him a ton of credit. He received an honor from the NHL as one of the 3 stars of the week. The Avs wouldn't have this, only losing once in regulation, without Scott Wedgwood. But now you're starting to be reminded, in case you needed reminding, oh yeah, Mackenzie Blackwood is their number 1 goalie. It's like, I'll compare it to make an NFL comparison. San Francisco right now, look at what happened to them yesterday. Right? They get by for a game or 2 with Mac Jones, and it's a great story, and Kyle Shanahan does it again, and I was one of those. But long-term, and Joe Flacco, right? Look at Joe Flacco and I don't know that yesterday's loss to the Jets is on Flacco, but it's just this idea, like, you can bring in the backup, and if you're a good football team or you're well coached, you can get by, maybe for a game, maybe 2. If you're Kyle Shanahan, you can get by with 3 games, maybe 4. But eventually, it's going to be exposed that you don't have your best guy at that position. And I think that's what we saw over the past week. Still Wedgwood making some great saves, but it's like, okay, now they need Mackenzie Blackwood back. That's what they need to do. So Avs have a chance tomorrow night to come right back, beat Jersey at Ball Arena. We'll have that game for you right here on Extra Sports 1300. Coming up next, back to the Broncos. Yes, much of the discussion and our discussion today started with the offense, and I think for good reason. But if you ask me what was the most impressive thing about yesterday, it was the Broncos defense. We'll talk about it next.
Is above the
Welcome in hour 2 on this Monday. Appreciate you tuning in to the show on YouTube, X, Facebook, Instagram, at XTRA Sports 1300. While you're there, like, subscribe, follow, drop a comment. And if it's not too much trouble, share and tell your friends. We thrive on word of mouth advertising in this business. But very much appreciate you tuning in and watching the show on a daily basis, as so many of you are, and more every day. So thank you for that. Broncos beat the Dallas Cowboys yesterday, 44-24, and beat seems like too nice of a word. Beat down, I kind of feel like, is more appropriate. And yes, all the conversation last week was, and really for the last month, has been centered around the offense, and credit to them. They put up big numbers. They kept their foot on the gas, which is something they didn't do against Cincinnati a few weeks ago when they had the opportunity to put together a similar kind of performance. But at the end of the day, you could say that the Broncos offense did what they were supposed to do against an incredibly banged up and quite bad Dallas defense. That's why the other side of the football was far more impressive to me. You know, we could talk about defense wins championships, but look at where the league is at. The league is built, and every year they add another piece to the puzzle to make it more difficult for the defense and easier for the offense. And maybe that's why the defense wins championships idiom, if you will, is maybe even more true. Because, man, if you got a defense to be able to hang with these quarterbacks and these offenses with these rules, then you really got something. But the Denver Broncos defense, what they did to the Dallas Cowboys, is far more impressive than what Bo Nix did to that defense. Dak Prescott came in not just playing good football, right? Broncos have played some quarterbacks that have played good football. Dak was putting together an MVP caliber season. I know nobody wants to talk about it because everyone, throws up in their mouth when they think about the Dallas Cowboys or are about to say anything nice. But the fact of the matter is, Dak Prescott was leading the NFL's best offense. And the Denver Broncos handed him his worst performance of the year without question, and maybe by a wide margin. And you know the crazy thing about it? Because if I would have told you, oh, Broncos, controlled the Dallas offense and Dak Prescott had a really bad day, you would think, oh, they probably sacked Dak Prescott 5 times. Nope, 2. Which is not even the highest sack total any team has had this year against Dak Prescott. 2, and for the Broncos defense, 2 is nothing. 2 is a bad day for them in terms of sacking the quarterback. What was so impressive about what the Broncos defense did to Dallas was that they were able to hold them down for 4 quarters without actually getting to Dak Prescott. But even though they didn't sack him, Sean Payton felt like his defense did their job against the Cowboys quarterback.
I thought we affected him, and that was important. I thought our red zone defense forcing, the very quick sudden change, forcing a field goal. I thought those were important plays for us. And then I just didn't think they could keep up with what we were doing.
And they couldn't. They absolutely couldn't. Javonte Williams had a nice day in his return to Denver, and Bo Nix and many other players talked about how happy they are for Javonte Williams. And I talked about this last week. Like, the Broncos are not in a position to wait around and see if this Javonte Williams was going to emerge this year. They had to move on. They had to. There just wasn't anything there last year to say, let's give it another shot with how important this season is. So some breakups actually work out for both sides, and this is one of them. Javonte is doing incredibly well with Dallas, and the Broncos are over the moon about J.K. Dobbins, and now especially R.J. Harvey after the day he had. Javonte Williams did enough, right? Javonte did enough to, maybe say like, hey, Broncos, look at me. Look at how I'm doing. There's a little bit of that, right? And he did that to his credit. But who did I worry about all week on behalf of the Denver Broncos? Jake Ferguson. You know how many catches the outstanding Dallas tight end had? None. All this talk about, and it's coming from me, I'll raise my hand because I participated. The talk about, oh no, they don't have Dre Greenlaw, and now we're back to what the Colts did with Tyler Warren, and the middle of that defense is going to get torn up, and it's going to be Ferguson to have himself a day. They completely took him out of the game. Completely took him out. And if you're trying to find one player on the Dallas Cowboys offense to say, if we take him out, and I talk about this all the time, when it comes to on the switchbacks broadcasts, Roland and I usually highlight one player for the opposing team where we say, that's the guy you got to remove. Right? Well, for Dallas, yeah, they have CeeDee and they have George Pickens and they have Javonte Williams. They're loaded offensively. And even the Broncos defense is not going to take all those guys away. But if Vance Joseph has his druthers, and what can go the longest way to slowing down the Dallas offense, it's Ferguson. And the Broncos completely took him out of that game. And I'll put it this way, on CeeDee and George Pickens, the Broncos did as good as I would have expected them to. Right? That's the best wide receiver tandem in the NFL, and you're not going to hold down everybody. But the Broncos, even without sacking Dak Prescott, were able to get the Cowboys offense off the field on third down. That first drive where Dallas is knocking on the door with a chance to go up 7-0 and the Broncos hold them out of the end zone. How big was that stop in retrospect? Right? You look at a game, and I know the game wasn't as close as 44-24 would lead you to believe, but let's just do the math. And let's also talk about the psychological aspect it could have. If Dallas goes right down the field and puts up 7 points, think about how Empower Field is going to feel. And then that's coming off of Bo Nix throwing an interception. I mean, you settled in to watch that game, and I was watching with my brother yesterday, and I hear that the Broncos are receiving. I'm like, they never receive. And with an offense like the Dallas Cowboys, that middle eight, they can exploit that. And now you're handing them the opportunity to score going into halftime and coming out of halftime. And then not only do you elect to receive, which you never do, Bo Nix throws a pick on the first drive, and Dallas drives right down the field, is knocking on the door, think about the psychological impact. If not the math, if in the end it didn't see that whether they scored a touchdown or kicked a field goal there wouldn't have mattered. I think it would have mattered psychologically. You take the ball with the idea that you're going to probably try to punch Dallas in the mouth, right? You see the matchup that your offense has against their defense, and you say, we want to come out and set the tone early. Well, you fail because Bo Nix threw a pick. And now it's Broncos fans' worst nightmares. Right? Bo Nix throws his first interception in however long. The Dallas Cowboys offense goes right down the field. They're knocking on the door, but the Broncos defense holds them out of the end zone. And a little bit of a sigh of relief. Okay. It's not as bad as it could be. Broncos come back. The second drive, respond, and away we go from there. I mean, that was easily the most impressive performance from the Denver Broncos defense this season. And I'm saying that without Nick Benito and Jonathan Cooper wrecking the game. And you want a sign of how good this Broncos defense is, that's yesterday. Even though they couldn't do the thing they're most known for, they were still able to hold down the NFL's best offense and keep a quarterback who had, to that point, a terrific season, an MVP caliber season, to hold them to his worst stat line by far this season. Incredibly impressive from the Broncos defense. And now you can look at it and say they get Dre Greenlaw back this week. But both the reason why Dallas offensively made it look respectable in terms of the number of the points they scored, and why you can't be too excited about Dre Greenlaw returning is because there may be an even more significant player on the Broncos defense that will not be available against Houston, and who knows how long after that. We talk about Pat Surtain next on Extra Sports 1300. You know, there is nothing quite like Service Academy football. And coming up Saturday morning at Falcon Stadium, Air Force is going to be hosting rival Army. Did I mention the kickoff was at 10? I said the morning. Kickoff is at 10 a.m. If you want to go, this is the game to go to. Be the 13th texter to text Beat Army. We want to weed out any Black Knights fans who want to infiltrate Falcon Stadium, and we do it with this very scientific, foolproof way of making them, because no way would an Army fan, even if it got them free tickets, they would not text Beat Army for fear of being found out. So text Beat Army and your name to 719-247-1313, and the 13th texter will score 4 tickets to Saturday morning's game at Falcon Stadium. It was a banner day for the Denver Broncos. Everything was great except for one thing, and it's a big thing. Pat Surtain leaving the game with an apparent shoulder injury. This was after he looked like he hurt his calf earlier in the game, was able to play through it. But yesterday was rough on Pat Surtain. And he's having an MRI today. You know where Sean Payton stands when it comes to injuries. No update when he met with the media this morning. And Broncos country collectively waits with bated breath. The reigning defensive player of the year may be out for some amount of time. Now, even if it's like, let's say, a separated shoulder, okay, which is at this point one of the better case scenarios, depending on how badly he did it, right? But let's just throw that out as an example. He's still probably not playing against the Chiefs, right? And that's what all this is building to. Everything that the Broncos have done to this point is building to that matchup right before the bye week against the Kansas City Chiefs, with divisional implications on the line. With that primary goal that Sean Payton threw out of winning the division, backing up his comments after the Buffalo playoff game, in which he said that they felt good about their chances in the next round, which would have been Kansas City. All of this stuff with the Denver Broncos revolves around that football game. And the prospect of not having the defensive player of the year, your best player, regardless of the side of the football he's on, that would be a massive blow. And, you know, we could put it in its proper context and understand that the next two opponents are not Kansas City. And I mean that there's a few different things I'm alluding to with that, both in importance of the game and quality of opponent. But you can't totally nap on the Texans, right? They're still receiving talent. I don't know what the heck. Sean Pendergast is going to be my guest coming up later this week to preview this game. He's in it. He hosts a show on the flagship station of the Houston Texans. He knows them better than anybody. My question is just, what is going on? Now, Houston's coming off a win against San Francisco. And there is receiving talent. So to say that in this magical world where you could say Pat Surtain is only out for 2 weeks, but not 3, it's still it's still concerning. Right? I think everything is about that game in 3 weeks. But in the meantime, you would certainly like to have a couple more wins under your belt when you go into that game. I don't think that the team they play on Thursday night after the Texans game is that big of a concern. It is a divisional game with the Raiders, so those usually lend themselves to be close, and having your best player on the field maybe makes the play that ultimately decides it. I will give the Broncos their proper respect while disrespecting the Raiders to a proper amount as well, and say they should be able to game plan without Pat Surtain and still beat the Raiders. But Houston could be tricky. And then you got the Kansas City game. Now, we'll wait and see how long he's out. And look, in the grand scheme of things, if he's out, you get that a week without a game right after Kansas City, that's a month. If he's out a month, then in the grand scheme of things, you live with it. Right? And you just got to go into Arrowhead on Christmas, right? So, I mean, there's obviously levels to this thing, and you hope that it's not the very bad end of the spectrum here with Pat Surtain, because he's what ties everything together. And you saw that once he went out, and you could also make the case that the Broncos defense had done their job, to that point, and the desperation level went up from Dallas. But you saw when Surtain went out of the game, Dallas started to have some success. And you know what this means. Whether it's just Sunday or it's 2 games, 3 games, or more than that. This means Riley Moss is now your number 1 corner. And this will go down as maybe the biggest argument that is being had in Broncos country all year. Bigger than whether Bo Nix is any good, bigger than if the Broncos are Super Bowl. The Riley Moss argument is one that it's never going to go away. Because, he's allowed the fewest catches on however many attempts. Yeah, but are you taking into account the amount of times he interferes with somebody? If you take those and say those would have been a catch, does his numbers still hold up? And he had, the Broncos defense had a really good day. Riley Moss had a really bad day. Can we at least agree on that? Riley Moss has become the new favorite son of Broncos country. They protect him with every ounce of their strength. And it's like, can you admit that the guy had a rough day yesterday, or is that the referee's fault too? The fact of the matter is, Riley Moss, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Okay? He's not an elite second corner. He's not 1B with Pat Surtain. But he's also not terrible. And that's where I will meet you halfway. Riley Moss is not terrible. He's pretty good. Pretty good. But he has a problem interfering. He'd rather interfere with receivers than allow them to catch it. And there's an argument to be made there. But some corners don't have to interfere with receivers in order to keep them from catching the ball. So Riley Moss being your number 1 corner, and we'll see it, whether it's Sunday, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however many it is. That this love, this undying loyalty to Riley Moss and the willingness to protect him at whatever cost it's going to be put to the test because now he's the dude. Right? You're going to put Riley Moss as the number one corner now. I think you have to put Jahdae Barron on the outside, which I think is where he's going to end up eventually. I think he's going to supplant Riley Moss in that spot because you got to put McMillan as your nickel corner. He can't play outside. It's part of the reason why you drafted Barron, right? Was because he had positional versatility. McMillan doesn't have that. So now you're going, I mean, just as I'm saying it, think about how it hits you. You don't have Surtain, Moss, McMillan, Barron. Now you have Moss, McMillan, and Barron. That is a big difference. And that is a big difference for opposing offensive coordinators, for opposing receivers. You have Pat Surtain in there, and you live with everything else. Right? Everything else is settled. You're not asking. I know Riley Moss gets targeted a lot without Pat Surtain, but if you take away one side of the field, that is a huge advantage. It changes everything in this secondary. And I don't know that Jaquan McMillan has been great this year. Barron made some plays yesterday. It's kind of been quiet from him. We're talking about the, rookies, and we haven't really gotten into the Jahdae Barron conversation too much this year. But he made plays yesterday. But now his role is going to be even greater. And it'll be interesting to see how he fares. But Moss, McMillan, and Barron is a far cry from Surtain, Moss, McMillan, with a little bit of Jahdae Barron sprinkled in there. So we don't know yet. I think we'll know tomorrow. By the time we connect again at 3:00 tomorrow, I think we'll know. And you hope it's, a week. But they're just, and this is not scientific. This is just covering sports for as long as I have. And just a feel. If it wasn't bad, they would have said something. It would have leaked out. I'm not saying Sean Payton would say anything. Now, he may say he's fine, but I don't think that you can say he's fine because clearly he has something. If this was just like a week or two, I feel like we would have found out about it by now. It's kind of like when they have replay review in any sport. Right? The longer it goes, the more you're like, I don't know if this is going to end up being good news. That's kind of the way I feel. I don't know. This is non-scientific. I mean, even if it's 2 weeks, that's a huge sigh of relief. To not have Surtain against the Chiefs would be incredibly disappointing. And then obviously there's a worser case scenario beyond that even. We'll see. Broncos have dealt with their injuries, right? They have. The guard position, Dre Greenlaw, they've been dealing with it. This is in a completely different stratosphere to potentially be without Pat Surtain for some amount of time. Take your thoughts on it. 719-247-1313. I'll check the old feed while we're in a break and see if there's anything on Pat Surtain. Again, Monday Night Football, Commanders and Chiefs. Our coverage from Westwood One starts at the top of the hour. Congratulations to Rachel, who scored a 4-pack of tickets to see Air Force hosting Army this Saturday morning. Feel free to come by Falcon Alley on your way in. Say hi. I'll be out there with our friends from Frank Azar. More chances for you to win Air Force Army tickets as the week progresses. But right now, another chance for you to win Air Force hockey tickets. Halloween night, they are hosting Brown. If you would like to go, I have 2 tickets for the 13th texter to text Falcons and their name to 719-247-1313. Again, that's Falcons in your name to 719-247-1313. Yeah, that's what this week's going to be. A lot of ticket giveaways. Air Force hockey, Air Force football, both at home this weekend. So a lot of that. Switchbacks. It wasn't pretty. In fact, it was quite ugly Saturday in Tulsa. But not only do they get into the playoffs after all, they got a chance to put that loss to Tulsa far behind them because they got the same team, same bat team, same bat channel, same bat time as they go right back to Tulsa Saturday in a playoff match you can hear right here on Extra Sports 1300. We'll talk about that throughout the week. But, yeah, not good on Saturday. But thank you, Oakland. And the defending champs have a chance to fully defend their crown as one of the 8 Western Conference playoff teams. So tonight, the main attraction will be Commanders Chiefs, and our coverage from Westwood One starts at the top of the hour. But also tonight, a little bit of a bummer because Anthony Edwards is out tonight for the Minnesota Timberwolves as they take on the Denver Nuggets. In fact, because of how quickly the Nuggets turn around and play Minnesota again, this him being out for a couple of weeks prognosis means that Anthony Edwards, we will be 2 Nuggets Wolves games into the season with no Anthony Edwards. So what does that mean for tonight? It doesn't mean what all of these games were supposed to mean going into the season. I'm sorry. I can't. If the Nuggets win tonight and they haven't beaten the Minnesota Timberwolves since game 5 of the series they played in the playoffs a couple years ago, I can't say that they've exercised the demons. I can't. Not without Anthony Edwards. He's a huge part of why the Nuggets have such a hard time against this team. Now, if the Nuggets still lose to Minnesota, then maybe it further exacerbates this issue about how bad of a matchup Minnesota is for Denver. But I just can't go into tonight's game and go, if the Nuggets win, then, okay, we don't have to worry about Minnesota anymore. They don't have Ant. So what does that make it tonight? Well, that makes it you better win, first of all. And second of all, another chance to see this Nuggets team. I don't know that I can put a ton into Saturday when they're playing the Phoenix Suns. With all due respect, which isn't much for the Phoenix Suns. I don't know that I can look at that game and say, oh, this is who the Nuggets are supposed to be. I think the Golden State game is a pretty good indication. And the Nuggets kind of squandered that game in the last 5 minutes of regulation. I think you just get another look at this team. Minnesota, even without Anthony Edwards, is still better than Phoenix 100% healthy. So you could put a little bit more stock into it in terms of the way that players perform. Especially you look at like Jamal Murray's performance tonight. Okay, Anthony Edwards doesn't have a lot to say about that. Nikola Jokic's performance with Gobert and Naz Reid healthy. So there's some aspects of this, but without Anthony Edwards, it's just like it doesn't feel the same. But it is a better indication of who the Nuggets are to start this season than playing Phoenix. I think right now, the biggest thing I'm looking for with the Denver Nuggets, when is Cam Johnson going to, integrate himself into this team? It's only 2 games in, probably takes more than that, maybe takes more than 3 games. But that's kind of the early season storyline. That and Aaron Gordon doing ridiculous things. One night he's putting up 50. The next night he's pulling off a 360 alley-oop in the middle of a game. Like, that dude is on some different level right now. But the biggest early season storyline is, when is Cam Johnson going to be a real part of the proceedings, and what does it look like? Because the first 2 games, just kind of been a bystander. And not to say, oh no, the Nuggets lost the trade. None of that. Just, when is this guy going to make himself a part of the team and have an impact? And then we'll see what that looks like. So, yeah. No Anthony Edwards tonight for the Minnesota Timberwolves, which further exacerbates the disappointment in tonight's slate of games, because obviously no Jaden Daniels for the Washington Commanders. World Series is going on, Game 3. I don't know if you're watching that, but that's tonight. But yeah, injuries to star players certainly affecting the way we look at both Monday Night Football and this Nuggets-Wolves game. Get to a couple of your texts before we finish up here. Dave, talking about Riley Moss, not a good day for him. Says Riley Moss gets caught with the response to the receiver's push or pull on a lot of his PI calls. Refs seem to have him under a microscope similar to Bowles circa 2022. I actually really like that text, Dave, because I think you're right in that. Because here's the thing. His reputation is preceding him. 100%. Right? But you're put under the microscope, and you can say that's not fair, but what they're seeing under that microscope is actually happening. I don't know that they're missing something on the offensive player and they're just getting Riley Moss. I don't believe that that's the case. But I do think you're right, because Riley Moss has committed so many defensive pass interference penalties, and some quite egregious ones, that he is under a microscope. They are kind of looking for it. But the question is, when they're looking for it, do they see it? Nobody's making anything up. That was last week's crew. That was the Giants crew that was making things up on Riley Moss. And to be fair, I defended Riley Moss. I said that play at the goal line in no way, shape, or form is that a defensive pass interference on Riley Moss. I watched the entirety of the game yesterday. Riley Moss did not get enough defensive pass interference penalties. Like, he could have had more. But I do think you're right, Dave. I do think he's under a microscope. And look, it's an unfortunate situation. And it's the case because he does this, right? Like, it's not that the referees go in saying, let's look at number 21, right? It's because of his reputation. Same with Garrett Bowles, to your point. But what happens when you have the microscope on you? You got to be on your best behavior. As difficult as that is, and I'll give Riley Moss a little bit of leniency, because Lamb or Pickens, take your pick, bad matchup. Bad matchup. You know, if Riley Moss is interfering with, I don't know, the Giants receiving core, I know he was called for one, but he didn't interfere, right? So that's why I bring that one up. That's a problem. I think regardless of Riley Moss's reputation, you could expect him to struggle with either George Pickens or CeeDee Lamb. So we can call what yesterday was what it was, and it was a bad day for Riley Moss. Give credit to the rest of the Broncos defense for, despite that being phenomenal, and say, well, not every team has George Pickens on one side and CeeDee Lamb on the other. But Riley Moss has got to figure it out. It's not going away. It's the same thing with Garrett Bowles. And Garrett Bowles fought through it, and Garrett Bowles improved. And now the guy's hardly ever called for holding calls. Again, Riley Moss is guilty. Right? They're not making stuff up other than the Giants game. And they're not even making that up. They just blew the call. I'm not dabbling in this nefarious whatever the crap was going on Broncos Twitter last week. They blew it. It was a terrible call. Terrible call at the goal line. But that wasn't the first defensive pass interference Riley Moss has been called for this year. And he's gone away with a few. Tough gig. I get it. Tough gig to be opposite Pat Surtain. But you got to call it what it is. The guy struggled. And the only way out of it is for him to play a clean game. Just like Garrett Bowles. That's why your text was so good, Dave, because Garrett Bowles is an example in that locker room that Riley Moss can go to and be like, man, I feel like I'm being picked on. Garrett Bowles is like, yeah, I dealt with that too. How'd you work out of it? My guess is Garrett Bowles will say, I improved my technique. I stopped holding. I mean, not completely, because you could call offensive holding on a lot of downs. But he didn't do it long enough for the referees to not go in with the thought in their head of, oh, we got to watch 72. Whether referees admit it or not, they have that. Reputations matter. It does. We're dealing with human beings. Let's see. Where is your text, Drewski? There it is. Didn't forget about you. Drewski from the 719 says, you're right about defenses of figuring out offenses now, but your opinion on the Giants stopping the tush push against Philly, even if it was a BS call on forward progress. Yeah, that should have been a fumble. That should have been. I think are teams figuring out how to defend the tush push. I think that naturally happens, right? How long have the Eagles been doing this? I think there's some new ideas. I think they're trying different things. And I do think that there's a figuring out going on. But here's the thing. Not every team has Abdul Carter, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns. Right? So there's something to be said for teams maybe figuring out how to better defend the tush push. Not every one of those teams has a front four like the Giants do. So there's the figuring out, and then there's actually having the players necessary to stop it. And that is that's the position that many NFL teams find themselves in. But this isn't going to be, it's not going to be a thing much longer. They're eliminating this play. They're outlawing it after this season. But good on the Giants. They got the personnel to be able to stop it, and they had some ideas on how to stop it. Now, maybe that's a battle they won. They lost the war. And Saquon Barkley looks like Saquon Barkley again. But yeah, I do think teams Defense is figured. Mahomes got figured out to an extent, right? Teams started to take away the deep ball. He had to figure out how to win in different ways. I think that's happening with the tush push, but it's not. It's Jalen Hurts, right? That's where it starts. Not everybody has Jalen Hurts. That's why teams don't run the tush push. Other teams, I'm sure, have some really great ideas on how to stop it. They don't have the front four that the Giants do. So I think those two things kind of intersected yesterday. For one glorious moment, the Eagles' tush push was stopped. Not that I have a rooting interest or anything like that. It's going away. It's going to be a moot point. And we'll just reminisce years down the road. Remember when Philadelphia just shoved Jalen Hurts across the line of scrimmage all the time? Yeah, whatever happened to that? Before I go, I want to ask you, do you feel off? Like maybe you're tired, your motivation's gone, not performing like you used to at work, at home, or at the gym. May not just be aging, it could be low testosterone. That's where Synergenics and Low T Center come in. Their testosterone replacement therapy has helped thousands of men feel like themselves again. I've heard guys say it changed their life. And when you really think about it, it does. It improves your quality of life, and why is it being life-changing? And here's the best part. You could start with just a free testosterone test. There's no risk. No cost, no pressure, just answers. Don't let this be another thing you keep putting off. The best version of you is out there. Take the first step. Go to trtmvp.com. That's trtmvp.com and book your free test today. The best you is waiting with the help of the fine folks at Low T Center. That'll be it. I will send a text to our winner. I got to count the text messages for the hockey tickets, but I'll be in touch with the winner shortly. And then we'll reconvene tomorrow at 3. Up next, Commanders Chiefs on Extra Sports 1300.